It is weather and ag in focus here on this fabulous Tuesday afternoon. Although I must say, the humidity, whew, dogs, that's supposedly we're getting into those dog days of summer, and this makes me feel it. Addison, don't go outside. This is not your kind of weather day.
I went outside a little bit earlier and I almost turned around and walked right back into the building.
So that's enough. I don't need to see this.
Yeah, it's pretty gross
Uh,
outside.
Fair enough. If the humidity's there, again, we're looking forward to seeing the crop just erupt this week, right? Big changes coming as we get some warm weather. Also, just a reminder to those who are trying to clean up from some storm damage. We saw some high winds at Webster, North Dakota yesterday. Also, we saw hail in South Moorhead, etc. So, to those folks, I'm sorry. I really hope these things turn around for you and that we continue to have a fantastic crop for the year with less damage. Much would appreciate that. So, today, let's check into what our blooming canola forecast might just be.
A much quieter weather day today after hail reports and wind damage from yesterday's storms. Much nicer today. In fact, a lot of sunshine for the rest of the afternoon. Much less humid as well. It will be on the breezy side as those southwest winds pick up 15 to 30. We'll have highs in the mid 80s. And then partly cloudy skies overnight tonight with lows in the low 60s. And we could see a few morning showers on Wednesday. Then partly cloudy skies. We'll have highs in the mid to upper 80s. And then we stay in the upper 80s for Thursday and Friday. There is a chance for some nighttime storms both Thursday and Friday. And then as we head into the holiday weekend, unfortunately, there is a chance for scattered storms on the 4th of July with highs in the mid 80s. And then Sunday looks to dry out, and we'll have highs in the upper 80s. And then we'll start off next week on the hot side with highs in the lower 90s. I do see a lot of upper 80s and lower 90s for next week, with a few chances for storms as we head towards the middle of next week. So all in all, a pretty summer-like looking forecast with temperatures above normal. And then, again, storms come back into the forecast Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I'm not too worried about severe weather with these. They could pack a little punch, but not too worried about severe weather like we saw yesterday.
Well, if you are concerned about severe weather, if you have some details about what may have happened at your farm or home, you're welcome to give us a call on the JLA insurance phone line. That number is 701-293-9000. I remember that number just as much as I remember the phone number for the pizza place when I was in college. And you can also send me emails, ag@flagfamily.com. Much appreciate those. Happy to answer the questions that you might have. And if you're watching the live stream, that's brought to us by Lighthouse Commodities, Acres TV, Facebook, and YouTube is where you can see what's going on. And especially guests often share photos that they want to talk about. That will certainly be the case tomorrow when we have the Odie family from the Aberdeen, South Dakota area joining us. We're going to talk all about Steiger tractors and their Steigers that are going to be headed to the Western Minnesota Steam Threshers reunion at Rolog over Labor Day. That's one you aren't going to want to miss. And even today, when we talk with Chris Sherman from Tech Support Farm, we'll have video that you can see, and you can certainly, again, send us those questions on email or call me on the JLA insurance phone line, 701-293-9000. When I made mention of the weather, I did call it the blooming canola forecast. But even before that, I said, here we are approaching what we call those dog days of summer. So we've now passed our longest day of the year, and we averaged about 14 and a half hours of sunshine when we turned that calendar into official summer. So days start getting shorter. I'm not excited about that part. Nonetheless, there really is an official specific 40-day period from July 3rd to August 11th that are the dog days of summer. And they trace all the way back to ancient Rome when the star Sirius also was known as the dog star, and it was the brightest star in the nighttime sky. Now, Sirius, we understand now, is actually a star system, but it was seen by the naked eye as a single star, and towards the beginning of Roman summer, Sirius would disappear from the night sky and start rising and setting in conjunction with the sun. So the Romans thought that the heat from Sirius added to the heat of the sun during this time created these hot, steamy days, and they called them dog days. Interestingly enough, Sirius no longer rises at the same time as the sun because the angle the Earth sits on its axis has changed over time, and it altered where the stars appear for us as compared to thousands of years ago. It takes about 26,000 years for the Earth's axis of rotation to complete a full circle. There you go. Fun fact for those of you who didn't know that. And the dog days have always had very interesting folklore behind them. Many ancient cultures believed it to be a time of evil. I don't know, when it's hot and humid like this, that's a little evil, I think. The Greeks thought that Sirius caused abnormal behavior in animals and humans as well, and poor souls suffering from the star's emanations were said to be star-struck. There's some other things that the Romans did. They sacrificed dogs and sheep to a goddess to prevent the star from causing wheat rust. Good news. We can just use a fungicide now, and we can avoid that problem altogether. We don't have to have any more of sacrifices in that case. Also, the ancient Egyptians believed that Sirius caused an annual flooding on the Nile, which was actually a celebrated occurrence. Not here. The flooding that we are currently experiencing in parts of North Dakota, not that celebrated, just saying. But there are old wives' tales as well. When people talked about the dog days of summer, one that we hear to this day is that if it's dry on the first day, which is July 3rd, it will be abnormally dry for the next 40 days. So mark your calendars. Let's see what the next 40 days might be bringing us when it comes to that type of weather situations. So, a little fun fact in history for you when it comes to the dog days of summer. Being that tomorrow is Wednesday weather trivia, I hope you paid attention. What if my trivia question tomorrow has to do with any of the things I just mentioned? I guess you'll need to be paying attention tomorrow to find out. A highlight in the month of June, which we are just about to wrap up, not only is the fact that June is Dairy Month, so celebrate today, have a milkshake, but the Primetime Gala is held by the South Dakota Cattlemen's Foundation. This gala event is not only a large dinner, auction, silent auction, and concert that raises money for Feeding South Dakota, but it's an annual event that's been going on for 13 years. Just this year, at the most recent event, over Father's Day weekend in Sioux Falls, they raised $292,000 that goes to Feeding South Dakota, which benefits them. They're similar to our Great Plains Food Bank in providing beef to those who need supplies from the food bank. So almost $300,000 to buy beef. Now, some of you are going to say, well, that doesn't buy as much as it used to, but it does buy beef for those who cannot afford it. And this is a wonderful project. If you ever have the opportunity to attend the gala, I strongly recommend that you do. I've had the great fortune of being able to be there, and it is completely worth your time. Other things that are going to be worth your time, sticking around. After we get the livestock market update from the American Ag Network, we're going to be joined by Chris Sherman. He is with Tech Support Farm. Man, I got pages of safeguarding cyber information discussion to have with Chris, so stay tuned.
Which
I am excited to have Chris Sherman of Tech Support Farm joining me today because cybersecurity never rests, whether it's the hot days of summer or anything else. And so, Chris, as a guy who's behind the scenes for so many cybersecurity situations, have you seen an uptick as of late, or in any particular instances, have you watched some upticks happen with hackers targeting farms right now?
Currently, I mean, obviously the email address issue has always been an issue, spoofing and phishing attacks. But the big one right now that we're seeing is password resets. And so when people, text in or they're asking us to reset their password, we have to be really careful because a lot of times those are threat actors that are trying to gain access to accounts through password resets. So that is definitely the one that we're watching right now.
How do we know? Okay, and I know we've talked about this before, but it still keeps happening. So what's the reminder to people to stop it from happening to them?
Okay, there was an older gentleman that I used to work with, and his favorite saying was, let your fingers do the walking. Instead of going downtown and running, doing the things physically, just pick up the phone and call. That is the number one thing that we're doing now. When we have guys that put in a password reset request, I don't care if it's during business hours or after hours, we will personally call them, verify that they requested that password reset, and we'll do it in real time with them. That is the best way to do it. Again, when it comes to phishing attacks, and let's say somebody's spoofed one of your vendors and sent out invoices, pick up the phone and call them and make sure that they actually did indeed send that invoice out. And the other thing would be is verify that they really did move up to online payment systems, that sort of thing. Verify first and let your fingers do the walking.
One of the things that we shared between each other before the show today was talking about some of the articles that are currently being written about cybersecurity and what's been going on. AGCO back in May of 2022, and again, they are one of the largest ag equipment manufacturers in the world. They suffered a ransomware attack. And as you think about the industry and what improvements we've made, what are some of those things that come to mind? What are we doing better these days as an ag industry, whether it's at the farm level or at the agribusiness level?
I think that as an industry overall, I think that we are more mindful of where our data is and who's owning it and how it's being protected. From a security industry standpoint, I think we're doing a significant better job of locking up the doors and making sure that everything is overly secured. The challenge really boils down to humans. Most cyber attacks these days are social engineering, and it's that idea that you can get away with a lot of things in life if you're confident, you act like you belong there, that sort of thing. And so we really need to be mindful of, you know, of those attacks that are against us and not necessarily against the infrastructure, the machines, or the network. It's really going to be somebody that you're talking to who appears to be legitimate, and unfortunately they're not, and that seems to be the way that we're getting scammed the most.
You said that about basically talking your way into it to try to make people believe that you should be there. Later, I
Yes.
have a story. Later, I have a story for you about a college-age girl we both might know who talked her way onto the nitty-gritty dirt band tour bus. But hey, that's
There
another
you go.
example of confidence. Okay,
I
so
mean, it is as simple as somebody calls up the farm, asks to speak to the bookkeeper, tells them that they are
uh-huh.
from, whatever department, makes up a department and says that they're here to do a quick audit. Everybody suddenly is panicked, and what do? They start handing over information, and before you know it, they're in your bank account, and you let them in, you open the door for them. So we have to be really constantly vigilant about that.
let's talk about AI. And there's positives and negatives. We can be using AI to scam others, or we can be using AI to protect ourselves. Which one do you think is advancing faster? Are we using it more for the scouting and protectionism side of things?
I think we're keeping up with the hacking side of it. I think that for every time that there's an advancement in AI as a malicious attack, I think that we're using AI just as frequently to thwart those attacks. And so, from that standpoint, I think we're not seeing such a rise in the actual severity of the threats. I think we're just seeing a rise in the overall volume of the attacks that are on the horizon.
What are some of the areas in which people are calling you and wanting to do more more work? Is it focusing on what's happening on the desktop at the office? Is it bringing connectivity to remote sites so that they can protect those assets out there? Is there a way to weigh it out about which is happening more frequently or what industry wants to talk to you more often these days?
It's interesting because in that regard, we are definitely seeing a lot of people looking at connectivity solutions. Nobody wants to be paying multiple internet bills for, 5 different properties, right? It'd be easier just to, use a point-to-point bridge system and move the internet from one site to everybody else. That is the most important one. The other one would be security cameras are definitely something that people look at. But now it's more sensitive. So they're watching irrigation systems, they're watching, flocks, animals, that sort of thing. And so the protection of that data is really top of mind, the security of that data, right? You don't want to have something like a Ring doorbell camera system where you're pretty sure that it's stored over in China and anybody can access it. This is, this is sensitive information. It's really important, especially with the whole rise of agroterrorism and people that are wanting to, report, or the whole PETA issue is really definitely
Hmm.
something at top of mind. The other big one that we're seeing right now, and we're kind of right in the weeds with everybody else, is definitely AI and how to incorporate that into our overall farm and unifying existing platforms and making them work a little bit more efficiently, and have more of an operating integration as opposed to just data collection. Uh, Unfortunately, we're not seeing a whole lot of progress on that front just yet. We're not seeing any solutions that are on the marketplace that really answer all of that question. But I believe that in the next probably 24 to 36 months, that is what AI is going to be in charge of, is taking existing systems throughout, the industry, whether it's software platforms, pieces of equipment reporting data, databases, all of that. We will start seeing AI platforms that are able to pull all that information in and then start making, educated recommendations back to the grower or the producer.
And honestly, we shouldn't approach this with fear or skepticism. We should approach this as things are improving and we can use it to our benefit.
They are improving, but I would caution everybody to be really mindful of a couple things when we're looking at AI or even just technology in general. Let's remember to understand fully what our expectations are for the AI or even just a tech advancement in your operation. Make sure you understand what you're expecting it to do, and then really dial in and make sure that it's actually feasible. Right? There's certain things that we are unable to do, and even AI is unable to do at this point. The other thing that I would recommend is understanding how AI works. And this is really kind of the approach that I've kind of come to with artificial intelligence. We have this idea that it knows everything, right? And so that's kind of like having the new guy show up on the farm on day one, and you just start rattling off everything like he's been there for 20 years, and that guy is inherently going to look at you and be confused as to what we're doing, and he's going to start making stuff up too, you know. And then we get upset with it, and really we need to remember that AI is essentially a new employee. It's a smart employee, but it doesn't know
Hmm.
everything. It doesn't know how you like things done. And when you're using it, remember to keep that in mind, that it is a new employee. You do need to walk it through things and help it understand things, and really take some extra time to learn the platforms that you're using, whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or Anthropic or any of these different platforms. They're all very good. Some of them specialize in different things better than others. But remember, it is the new employee. It is not God. It doesn't know everything. And you know, and whatever you do, don't use it for relationship advice or terminating employees or anything like that. It is not, yeah, can't replace
No,
professional services.
that's exactly right. We need to have the right people in the right place, and that might not be quite the right one. But
No.
the
The other
expert,
thing that I
the
would
expert,
caution everybody
uh-huh.
is remember that all of those records are public. Okay. So if you're putting information on your AI platform that is sensitive to you, if it's proprietary, if it's financial, all of that stuff is publicly searchable and it is available and you can find it. It is also, subject to subpoena to court if you ever find yourself sued. So don't be planning your crimes on ChatGPT.
First of all, that's great advice. But
Yeah.
does it differ between chat like to Claude? Because I thought Claude was closed where that information was not publicly searchable. Or am I wrong?
I
And I might
couldn't
be wrong.
answer that definitively, but what I would say is I would, it's kind of that concept of always assume it's a loaded gun. I would assume that it is available on the web, unless you have developed it yourself and you know that for sure. I think we're too far early on in the game to know for sure.
I don't want folks who have questions to think that they can't ask them just because I'm visiting with Chris. And so, as always, you can reach us on the JLA Insurance phone line of 701-293-9000. We thank Landmark Companies, our local leader in farm drainage, for being a part of today's show as well as a sponsor. And be sure to talk to Blake Sunday over at Landmark, talk about early order discounts because they are precision drainage with proven results. We've been talking with Chris Sherman with Tech Support Farm, and we'll be right back after the news. Well, you heard me make mention of landmark companies, and I strongly suggest that if you have a potential project coming up, give them a call. Talk to Blake. They'll handle everything from evaluating your field to final installation, so you're not juggling contractors and guessing at your decisions. Because the goal over at landmark companies is simple: make your land work harder for you year after year. It's that time of the summer where we're putting the planter away, maybe cleaning out the shop, and you came across a few things, especially as we get closer to the end of spray season, and you think, I don't need that sitting around anymore. Well, if you're a farmer, rancher, homeowner, government agency, pesticide dealer, and applicator, you can participate in the North Dakota Department of Ag Project Safe Send. Been doing this project since 1992. Nearly 12,000 people have brought in over 6.8 million pounds of pesticides to be safely disposed of. Nobody's going to ask you how you got those Tordon pellets. Nobody's going to suggest that maybe you should have thrown away those bottles of product from the garden a long time ago. But what they will do is take old, unusable, or banned pesticides and take care of them so that they're properly disposed of. The Department of Ag's website has a list of accepted pesticides. Remember, they don't take fertilizers. Nobody bring paints, and don't bring old gasoline or other fuels, kerosene, diesels, etc. Check your storage areas, get these things cleaned out. I've also had the bomb squad as a guest before, because they'll remind you that if you find old ordnance, call them. Don't put it in the car and drive it to the sheriff's department, which has in fact happened. They'd really prefer that you not be driving around with the Korean War type explosives in the car. Seems like a terrible idea, so don't do that. Also, if you're going to be going to Project SafeSend and you have more than 1,000 pounds of material, you need to pre-register. Or if you have more than a tote, a 250-gallon tote. So make sure that you have this discussion with those folks at Project SafeSend. You can find them at the Department of Ag. Check their website. First sites that are going to be open will be Tuesday next week in Castleton, Wednesday Jamestown, Thursday Bismarck, Friday Dickinson, all morning long, 8 to noon, and they'll be at the highway department sites in those specific towns. So check it out. I don't think you want to skip that opportunity to get things cleaned out. And I wish I was joking about the ordinance, but I literally had the bomb squad on 2 summers ago, and they did say that it happens more than any one of us wants to know. Okay, all of you that are tea drinkers, hands in the air. And I raised mine. Even Addison, he joins me sometime, although he says I should not be drinking the unsweet tea.
It's a little gross, but like the raspberry one's okay, but unsweetened tea, eh. Sweet tea's where it's at. Everyone knows.
I'll arm wrestle you for it later. I'm still on team unsweet. Thank you, though. Appreciate your offer.
We'll see how that goes.
All right. Where does tea come from? Most of the time we think about the country of Japan, right? That's probably the first and foremost. But Kenya actually is higher on the list than you may anticipate. They rank third in total world production, and they lead with about 95% of their production going to exports. And it presents a pretty good combination of what happens in their gross domestic product. How do they take care of tea leaves? Well, so first of all, their farms are not measured in acreage. They're measured in how many tea trees or bushes do you have. And so they have multitudes of small sustenance farmers who are taking care of these plants. The leaves are picked when it has 2 leaves and a bud, and they pull those off and toss them into a basket. This is a hand harvest situation. And they do that usually later in the late summer. They can have multiple harvests, and it's all being done by hand labor. And once the tea comes in, the leaves are dried and processed into a black orthodox, which is a type of loose leaf tea, or a CTC, which is a crushed granule that's very common in the ready-to-brew tea bags. It can be sold at auction and then shipped abroad. Most folks who drink English breakfast tea, that particular varietal, if you will, it has tea leaves in it not only from Kenya, but India and Rwanda, all major tea producers. And it brings different attributes, making it very unique. Teas from different regions come together to form one particular flavor, or specific flavors from specific regions. There is a tea board, and they try to help both grow export and local markets in Kenya. Now, there's an extension service in Kenya that works to educate their producers. They talk about pruning, fertility, pest management. They also identify blocks of trees that need to be replanted for longevity. Many bushes are 60 years or more old, and they produce well beneath their potential. So when you look at tea on the shelves in your respective country, you don't know where it's coming from, what may affect the price, but often it's things that are happening continents away. There is a tea plantation in British Columbia. I have tried several times to get them to be guests here on the show. So far, we haven't found the right combination of timing yet for them, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop, especially considering the volume of tea I managed to consume, hot or cold, all in one day. Over in Minnesota, Minnesota Department of Agriculture wants you to comment on the neonicotinoid treated crop seed and how it's regulated in the state of Minnesota. The Department of Ag there was given a ruling back in January of 2026 by the Ramsey County 2nd Judicial District Court, and it ordered Minnesota Department of Ag to initiate what they called the appropriate administrative proceedings to consider and make findings and an order concerning the adequacy of its rules to protect natural resources from contamination from potentially treated neonicotinoid seeds. Okay, here's how this works. When you buy seed, even as a farm, let's say you buy soybeans, oftentimes they come treated, and that may be treated with an insecticide active ingredient, which falls under the category of neonicotinoids. That's a mode of action, if you will. And when you do that and you don't use all of your treated seed, you have to dispose of it properly. Minnesota wants to investigate if they have the right rules, if this is being done in the right manner. Now, they don't just want you to send a message that says, I'm for or against. Talk about what you do as an end user. What are the rules that apply to you and how do you follow them? Or what could be done better and or differently? That's what the MDA is currently looking for. They want to hear from those who have end user experience to understand what really happens out in the field. And it's not just always in large commercial seeds, such as soybeans. Even when I order pea seed, oftentimes I'll find the seed is pink over the top of its green outer shell. It's because it was probably also treated before I was able to plant it. I'm not afraid of that. Helps keep bugs down, can protect from disease if there's other factors that are treated on the seed as well. The thing to remember is just wash your hands after you're done, or wear gloves, especially like a plastic glove that doesn't give a barrier, or that gives you a barrier when you're planting the seed. But nonetheless, the comment period for MDA is open through the end of July. Here's your opportunity to go check it out, and it will be on the Minnesota Department of Ag website. Also, buckthorn. Buckthorn, many of us consider an invasive weed here in the region. If you're a soybean producer and you have soybean aphids, which y'all do, I know some of you are trying not to think about it, but y'all have soybean aphids when they arrive. Aphids like to overwinter on buckthorn. It's generally found in shelter belts and so forth, and there are not great ways to keep it from being a problem. Oftentimes, this invader can be cut down. You can find it in tree rows, etc., but it comes back. And it usually comes back with a vengeance. And it can have such quick takeover that it can be a problem in forested areas. You know, all of you over in Minnesota with all those trees, which I don't understand, because as a kid from the prairie, how can you see what your neighbors are doing with all those trees over there? Nonetheless, if buckthorn is taking over in your trees, it's causing more problems than it's causing any good. So, what are the potential remedies to hold buckthorn back so it's not being invasive and it's not overwintering soybean aphids by your soybean field? Would be to go ahead and be using native plants and doing plantings in order to prevent the buckthorn from coming back. Because the native plants actually are good competition to keep away sufficient sunlight and space so that the buckthorn can't reestablish itself. If you're scattering seeds of native plants and wildgrass or wildflower, right after buckthorn is removed, it can keep that buckthorn from coming back because they compete so very well. There have been several findings on some work that's been done on buckthorn. The seedlings were about 45% smaller in places where the volunteers seeded native grasses and wildflowers compared to buckthorn buckthorn seedlings in plots that weren't. Revegetative seeding, when you're adding the native and wildflower seeds, provided very significant increase in the vegetative cover compared to plots that weren't seeded. Well, that makes sense. Pretty logical. Cover by grasses and sedges rather than forms, and yes, a lot of our pasture areas, especially those plants, are described as either grasses, sedges, or forbs. That's a whole conversation for another day, how we'll have to cover. But they contributed most to buckthorn suppression within the revegetative seeded plots, and that suggests that grasses like Canadian wild rye are well suited to suppress buckthorn throughout much of the state. More details can be found by checking it out through the Minnesota Extension Service at University of Minnesota. When we return, we'll do that blooming canola forecast for you one more time, and there'll be plenty of other tidbits and headlines to follow up on. Here we are with Weather and Ag in Focus on this fabulous Tuesday afternoon. I'm Ag Director Bridgette Readel. I'm really glad that you're able to join today. To some of the folks that sent me comments during the last segment as I talked about where your tea leaves might come from, um, several said that they really like coffee. I'll be honest, I never caught on to coffee. I was always told as a young adult that it would put hair on my chest, and I've been trying to avoid that my whole career. So, drinking tea over here, guys. Coming up on the 4th of July, and there's so many cool things that we should know, little bits of history. So, the red, white, and blue on our United States flag. Well, the colors of the flag have very important meanings. Red symbolizes hardiness and valor. And I don't think they just meant for military or rural, but for all of us. But that's where I'm going to put my thoughts. White symbolizes purity and innocence, and the blue represents vigilance, perseverance, and justice. Interestingly, the significance of the colors was retrofitted for the flag from the explanation for the Great Seal of the United States that was given by Charles Thomson, the Secretary of Congress, in 1782. Now, according to the federal flag laws and regulations, the flag should be displayed from sunrise to sunset, unless there's terrible weather, like many of you were a part of yesterday. That said, for a patriotic effect, the flag may be displayed 24 hours a day as long as it's properly illuminated while it's dark out. So get those spotlights handy. In 1824, a sea captain from Massachusetts who was named William Driver, he put the nickname of Old Glory on his American flag, which was crowned at the main mast of his ship and was sewn for him by his mother. After he retired from seafaring, he went to Nashville, Tennessee, and continued to proudly display Old Glory outside his house. Legend has it his 10 by 17-foot Old Glory withstood a lot of Confederate attempts to deface it during the Civil War, and Mr. Driver flew that flag over the Tennessee State House once the war was over. Also in 1922, his daughter, Mary Jane Rowland, presented Old Glory as a gift to President Warren G. Harding, who then gifted it to the Smithsonian. So, as you raise the flags or wave them at parades this weekend, there's just a few little tidbits of information that you should know. When it comes to what's happening in agriculture, let's hit some of those highlights. The U.S. is moving closer to a more workable system for letting drones fly beyond the operator's visual line of sight, or the BVLOS. But the change is not fully in place as of yet. Today, most BVLOS work still depends on waivers, exemptions, and other case-by-case approvals, which have made it hard for ag operators to scale routine flights across very large acreages. So for farmers, ag retailers, crop consultants, and drone service companies, limiting drone use to line of sight, well, it's impractical. It's hard to see it across many acres. And a lot of useful jobs in ag cover more ground than the pilot can realistically keep in sight from one location, whether it's large fields, irrigation infrastructure, mapping storm damage, looking over a livestock herd, and so much more. So the FAA is considering some rule changes. Where the rules stand now, under current law, a small UAS operations in the United States is generally governed by Part 107. That requires the remote pilot or visual observer to keep the aircraft within visual line of sight. BVLOS flights have therefore depended on those individual waivers and exemptions and limited certificates of authorization. The waiver-based regime has slowed the scale because each operator has to make the safety case, and approvals can take a lot of time to get done. While that process has allowed some progress in ag, it's not that simple. You don't get a broad permission to fly. So the proposed shift is a new FAA rule known as Part 108 that would be designated specifically to normalize those routine out of the line of sight operations. And the proposal would allow those flights up to 400 feet above ground level for drones that weigh up to 1,300 pounds. That includes payload within FAA-approved operating areas, and it's meant to replace much of today's patchwork approach, if you will, with a more standardized system built around operating permits and certificates. It matters on the farm because for agriculture, that outside line of sight is mainly about economics and efficiency. If a drone can cover more acres per flight or operate across a larger property without constantly repositioning its crew, or it can make aerial scouting and imaging more practical. And the eventual rule could also lower transaction costs for those out-of-sight flights, though it would also bring new compliance. So the final rule is not meant to be an instant, unrestricted use across every farm. Even after that final rule arrives, ag operators will likely need to meet specific requirements in specific areas, and in the next year or two, those who are in ag are going to want to pay close attention to what these changes might look like. One more thing as we approach the 4th of July holiday, the Pledge of Allegiance. As a kid, we had to say it every morning in school, and I don't disagree with it. And it was back in 1942 that the U.S. Congress formally recognized the pledge, and they included it as part of the Federal Flag Code. The Pledge of Allegiance was first used in public schools back in 1892, and students were taught to recite the pledge as part of a celebration marking the 400th anniversary of Columbus's voyage. The pledge was originally written in 1887 by Colonel George Bloch. He was a veteran of the Civil War who went on to become the auditor of the New York Board of Education. And he was committed to teaching children, and he wanted to show the loyalty to the United States. And the pledge was adopted by many, many schools at the time. Now, there's some new versions that have happened. The version that was most recently adopted was in 1954, after letter writing campaigns were sent to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The phrases that were all incorporated into the Pledge of Allegiance was done by a joint resolution of Congress, and that's where we added the two words, under God. So, a little bit of history, a little bit of fun in agriculture. Look forward to tomorrow. I'm going to be joined by a farm family near Aberdeen, South Dakota. We're going to talk about their Steiger tractor collection that's going to be coming to the Western Minnesota Steam Threshers Reunion in Rolog over Labor Day. And for all of you tractor enthusiasts, especially those who enjoy a good Steiger discussion, you're going to want to tune in tomorrow from 1 to 2 o'clock. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned because Jay Thomas is coming up next.